This is a talk about NOAA's transition to away from paper charts to all electronic formats, and we'll be looking at those changes and the tools that support them. So basically, they're discontinuing the raster charts because of the expense of maintaining two parallel operations, one for creating these paper charts with a lot of handwork, and the other that funnels into the many digital systems that are used now by both commercial and recreational boaters for showing electronic data. So I'm going to share my screen at this point and throw up some examples of what we're talking about. So it can just be a little more real. So let's see. Here is, let me blow this up so that it's not so hard to see. Can you all see that? These two charts?
Yes.
Yes, you can see them. So on the right, I should have ordered these differently. On the right is an old school paper chart of some of the islands in Boston Harbor. And on the left is an electronic chart, also from NOAA, of exactly the same area. And I think we can all see some differences right away, that the chart on the right has had a lot of care taken to carefully orient labels and in some cases flow them around features. Like this area here, you can see it says Nix's mate and a nice little curved line. There's a lot of human decision making that goes into the presentation of all this mapping information. On the left, this is generated really pretty close to 100% by computer. And so all the place names are there for the most part. A lot of the same information is there, but it's not hand tweaked to the same degree. And a lot of the reason for this goes into the fact that these electronic displays are not really intended to be consumed on paper. They're interactive by nature. So I'm going to go over to, we'll take a look at NOAA's custom charting tool. Not right now to make a chart, but just to look at how they display information. So this is the Golden Gate here. And as you zoom into different levels, you see different degrees of different levels of detail. The closer in you get, the more you see. So the chart's interactive, and this is how mariners use charts now. They don't just look at a piece of paper laid out on a desk. They're looking at a screen and they're pinching and zooming just like we do on their phones, on our phones. And they can get more or less detail as they need it, as they go. Also, unlike a paper chart, there's all kinds of information buried inside this chart digitally. So you could, for instance, identify a specific light and get all the informations about this light. This is Point Diablo. So it's telling us all about it, the signal period, the signal sequence. All this stuff is not printed, it's digital information that's stored relative to that location. So this is obviously super useful for mariners, and that's why NOAA is pouring all their effort into it. And people are buying fewer and fewer paper charts as recreational boating also tilts more and more to this world. So that, I think, is the driver behind their decision to retire the paper charts. Any questions so far?
Well, yeah, maybe this is one to defer to later. But you know, that one of the regulations, if you're in a vessel, is to actually have. Well, sorry, to say that what I've heard is that this tool does not constitute, like printing something out from this tool does not constitute the
That's right.
Coast Guard requirement of having a chart. So I'm wondering, do you know whether they intend to modify that rule at some point to make it so that things that come from this will satisfy that, or?
I don't know that they do, but recreational boaters are, I think, are exempt from what you're referring to, which are called carriage requirements. I think that's really for commercial shipping. And while they're required to have, I don't think they're even required to have paper charts. They're required to have up-to-date electronic charts.
Right.
And so with the key being up to date, it has to be up to date. It's much easier to keep these up to date than it is to keep paper charts up to date, which is yet another reason why they're putting more and more into the electronic side. So while this custom chart tool will not satisfy carriage requirements, it's aimed at people like us who weren't satisfying them anyway. I think.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Franca.
Yeah, this what you're showing right now on screen is something that somebody with a computer, with a laptop, can just access. So
Yes.
on a boat, so you don't need to have like a navigator or anything. You can just access this.
This is just a web browser, if that's what you mean.
Web browser, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will be giving links that send you to these various places in the slideshow that I share later on. But right now we're just using this to kind of look at what an electronic chart looks like and how it behaves. It's more interactive. And so when you print it, which we're going to look at how you make a printed version of this sort of thing, it loses all that interactivity. And that is why at the moment, these charts, they seem they're kind of crappy relative to the old paper version, because the people who when you're making a paper chart, you know it's paper. It's designed with the knowledge that when it's printed, that's all the person consuming it will ever get. This whole system of electronic charts was designed for interactive displays like this, where you can zoom and drill down. So NOAA's having really a hard time figuring out how to make this printable in a way that kind of captures the same design goals as the old paper charts did. And it's adequate, but it still isn't really great. And we may have to look to commercial vendors to kind of fill that gap. You know, the map techs and waterproof charts and ocean graphics and those people. Hope maybe they'll be able to do a better job than NOAA is currently doing. Anyway, let's go back to, let's see, where did I put that window? Let's play that game. So we were looking at this comparison of two charts, and I was talking about commercial vendors. You know, one of the things about the new electronic charts is that they can be displayed in many, many different ways by different computer systems. So here's yet another example of those groups, those groups of islands that we saw before. And on the left, you have NOAA's rendering of it. And on the right, you see a screenshot of Navionics, which is a very popular electronic chart system used by a lot of boaters, showing exactly the same stuff. And it's actually driven by the same data, but they chose different colors. They put the labels a little differently. You know, there's room for a great deal of flexibility in how these things are displayed. So I think we can expect to see competition improve the look of these charts quite a bit. So let's talk a little bit about the timetable of what's happening before we get into using the custom charting tool. NOAA has said over the next 5 years, all the paper charts are going away, but they're not all going away at the same time. They're on a rolling schedule. And for a while, I was wondering when the first ones would be going away. Well, it turns out a lot of them are about to go away in the next couple of weeks. For instance, San Francisco Bay. they're retiring the paper charts for San Francisco June 4th of this year. So it is really starting to happen. And I think it's going to push all these changes to probably unfold faster than I expected. When these charts go away, they won't be updated anymore. They'll still be available in some archival form, but it'll be harder to get them. And of course, they'll gradually become useless as things change and buoys move around and coastlines change and so forth. So I will be giving you links, and that's the same slideshow that you can use to access these lists. And in the NOAA chart locator, which is the place that historically we've downloaded these paper charts, they've marked with a big gray rectangle all the charts that are going away. So you can see it says here 18645 LE. That means the last edition for Gulf of the Farallones. They'll be canceled in October. So it's actually happening. All right. Why don't we move on then and talk about NOAA Custom Charts? And NOAA Custom Charts is a website. This is kind of what the main page of it looks like. And it is their attempt to answer the need for printable charts, since you can't really download an electronic chart and just print it out. It's not in any image format. So you need some kind of software to interpret it and make it printable for you. And that's what they've given us here. So I'll go through the process of making a chart of somewhere in the Bay Area so we can just see what it looks like. When you come in, you get this, let's just reload the page so we see exactly what you'll see when you come to this service. You see a map of the whole US, and you can drag the map around and zoom in, just like with many mapping services. And as you zoom in, bits of marine stuff will start to appear. You also see a lot of these red rectangles, which show you areas and scales. So that tells you what level of detail certain things are available at. And you can see that a lot of the bay is still just solid blue, because until you drill down to a certain scale, they don't give you any detail about it. But when you start getting closer in, you'll see depths. And then you'll see buoys and lights, markers. You'll start to see more information. And one feature of these charts that really takes some getting used to is when the scale is large, they will drop place names and marker information just right off the map. So you can see here's Lime Point, and it shows that there's 2 lights at Lime Point, but you can't see any information about them. Or here's a buoy over here, and there's no information about the buoy. It shows that it's red and green, but that's all. So as you drill down closer and closer, I don't know if we're ever going to see any information about this one. Maybe there isn't any, but let's go back to Lime Point. As we get further and further in, you can see now there's a legend saying, you know, what the flash rate is and the color and so forth. So that's an aspect of dealing with these maps it's a bit hard to work with sometimes. Anyway, the process of making a chart is as follows. You have these icons on the left that walk you through the various steps in making the chart. And I usually start with settings. So when you come in, there's a few different things you can change. I usually turn off the red boxes because they don't really add anything for making a chart. I describe these settings in the material I'll give you later, but I'm just going to do these things now. I turn off label contours. I turn off the safety contours and take away the fancy boundaries to just get dashed lines. And this just makes it a little bit simpler and a little bit easier to read. So at this point, we can pick an area that we want to see. Whoops, I'm scrolling a little too aggressively. So that would be the next step in this sequence of icons they walk you through, which is creating a so-called extent, the extent of a chart that you're going to make. So we have to pick a scale, and I usually go with 40,000 first to see what happens, because 40,000 is a good scale at which a lot of significant detail tends to appear. And it's also a typical scale of a chart that you might use today in paper form. You need to pick a page size. So I'm going to pick 11 by 17. And you need to pick an orientation. So let's go with portrait. And this tool here lets you place an extent, which you can then move, but I'll just click here to get something approximately right, and we can fine tune it. So now we have, oh, portrait. I didn't really want that. I don't think portrait is what I was after. I wanted landscape. I'm going to the next step, and we'll just delete this thing. So let's pick landscape this time. Oh, I have to click this button again first. All right, that's going to be the shape that our chart takes. And we can zoom in a little bit and blow it up and fine tune it. Maybe I want to move that down a little bit so I can get both the north and the south side of the Golden Gate, the out the gate area. So I'm just dragging this rectangle. You can make as many of these as you want on the map. They're all separate, separate charts that you'll go on and create in the next step, which is as follows. I'm clicking this next icon at the top called the export queue. And this is a list of all the charts that you've created on this map. I only have one. And you need to select a particular chart and then click the export icon, which is this thing at the bottom with the arrow coming out of it. And you'll sit here and wait for a minute or two often. And I don't know how easy it is to read the text, which is very small, even on my screen, but it's giving me a percentage of how much it's exported of this map. So you have to go through this waiting process while the map is churned out on their servers and sent to you. You can get more than one of these going at once, by the way, so that's at least some good news there. And it usually finishes when it says about 45%. That seems to be their version of 100%.
How do you get more than one going at the same time?
Why don't I do that in a second when we look at the results of this one that just finished. So here's our chart. And this is just a straight up PDF. It's geo-referenced if you care about that. But it's extremely sharp. It's not pixelated at all. As you can see, I'm blowing it up. And it's a very, in terms of the print quality, it's good. And it's got a nice grid on it. It's got some weird looking coordinates that looks like there's a bug in their software. But this is what we got. And you can see that it's got a lot of what we want. It's far from perfect. Point Diablo isn't even named here. We can see there's a signal that produces sound, but there's no information about it. So I often have found with this tool that you have to play with the scale. If 1 to 40,000 isn't doing it for you, you might have to make a 1 to 30,000 map to get certain place names and information to show up.
Joe, it's a little confused. When we looked at an electronic version,
Yep.
you didn't see any of the detail in the bay. You didn't see the shipping channels or anything.
That's right.
When you print it, all of a sudden they're there. Is that a bug or what's going on?
No, that's because I requested 1 to 40,000, but I wasn't looking at this overview at a 1 to 40,000 scale. So, and confusingly, it doesn't show you what scale you're viewing at. If we blow this up, you will see the same information.
Like elementary schoolers are not safe.
Hello? Yeah.
I think you have to be really.
So Stuart Cook, you have your microphone on.
Thanks.
Joe, you can mute everybody. if you want.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up the participants window and do that, but thanks for jumping in there. Yeah, I don't know if you can see well through this red haze here, but yeah, let's go up to Sausalito. If you're zoomed out, you don't see the detail, but the chart, if it's at an appropriate scale, will still print a lot of detail. Let's make a second chart and we can see a little bit about how that works. So I'm going to add a chart for Angel Island, and I'll make it at a very detailed scale, 1 to 10,000. And let's just put this here. And you can see how small that rectangle is. It's little because, it's little because it's at a very magnified scale. So it doesn't cover that much area, but it's still going to be 11 by 17. So, and let's add another chart for Sausalito across the way, same scale. So these are my two charts. Let's move them so that they actually touch each other, overlap a little bit. Now, if I go over to the part for exporting, you can see I have a list of several charts. And if I click one of them, it'll blink the corresponding chart on the map to show me what it is that I selected. So even though the names it gave them are chart 3, chart 4, which is not very helpful, I guess I could give them my own name. This is Angel Island. This one is Sausalito. And I'll export both of these. I'll select both of them and just click export. And now they're both going to export at the same time. And we can look at the results in a bit. While that's happening, I'm just going to look at some charts that I made in advance to talk about. So this is Golden Gate at 1 to 40K. And you can see Point Diablo here. It's unnamed, and it really doesn't have a whole lot of information about this light. But at 1 to 30K, all of a sudden the place name pops up and the information about the light is included. So it's very difficult to predict right now exactly what information you're going to get at a different scale. You unfortunately just have to try it. And exporting is really necessary to find out what you're going to get, because in that main view, as we were saying, you can be looking at the chart at a completely different scale from this, what it's being printed as. And that's why in this view, we just see blue, even though in the actual exported chart, we'll have a lot of detail. Let's look at our nice new 1 to 10,000 charts that we just made. So here's the one of Angel. I clipped off the top of it, I guess. But this isn't too bad in terms of labeling. There's a lot of, I don't see anything that's missing, obviously. Does anyone else? You know this area better than I do.
Old charts had contours for mountains, so Mount Livermore doesn't show up.
That's right. The old charts had topographic information. And NOAA has responded when I asked them about this, that they're going to begin including it in a future version of this viewer. So it's not there yet, but they recognize that they need to put it in. That is a big deficit, I think.
I think
think
I've
we-
seen some of that detail showing up from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at the one for Sausalito too. Obviously, these are very small, very detailed charts. They're probably too small to be all that useful unless you're doing a short trip. Anyway, other things you can do in this window, you can move the extents around and you can, re-export them. So if I don't like the way a map turned out, I could change its position. And this is also where you delete these charts. So if you click the delete extent button, you can select them in the list and then delete them. That's pretty much it. That's what this tool does at the moment. And I think the good thing about it is you can really go anywhere and make a chart of anything that NOAA deals with it. So it gives you great coverage and a lot of flexibility. But it still has a long way to go in terms of catching up with the traditional raster charts.
Joe, can you embed tide tables or stuff like that?
No, you would have to pull the PDF into some other environment and layer stuff on top of it.
Joe, what determines whether the compass rose shows up?
Well, there are two factors in that. So you have to turn on compass roses, and that's one of the settings. I think they're actually on here, but I didn't see any. Oh, there's one, or part of one. I don't think the compass roses are working too well in this version of their software. And I only see them sometimes, and sometimes they're clipped off like this one. So there's another one. This one looks complete. Yeah, I don't think they're doing a good job with the compass roses. They show up at some scale. They do apparently adjust themselves depending on where you're looking to be different sizes, which is nice. Oh, look, that was interesting. The one at the left appears at some scales. Well, compass roses, I think we can say they're not working great. As you can tell, this is not an ad for NOAA custom charts.
So it appears that there's a lot of wasted space in the margins. I wonder if it would be better to print them at C size and then crop them down to a B.
Like here, you mean these margins? Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, you can do that. And I have printed them at I've exported them at double size at some time and cropped them. You can certainly do that.
What does it mean exporting a double size?
So a D would be twice the size of a B. So you could print it as a B as a D, and then do something like GIMP to reduce it down to the scale that you want. I don't know how that would work.
It's a little annoying because they're PDFs. And so you need a tool that can bring in the PDF and deal with it as an image.
Well,
And-
GIMP will do that. That's free Photoshop equivalent.
Yes, GIMP will do it. I mean, I'm just saying you need, not every image editor will do a good job with that, but GIMP will. And I think Preview can do it too.
So I've done a lot of experimenting with this and come up with recipes.
Who's that, Margot?
Yeah.
Yeah. What have you found works well?
What I do is I make the chart in the next size larger of the page size selections in the custom chart tool that has the same aspect ratio as I intend to print it out on. And then within Acrobat, at least Acrobat Pro, you can go on a Mac, you have to go to the page setup, and then you can force it to print on the smaller paper size. And that way you don't waste so much for margins. And if you print within Acrobat at like 51%, you also shed a little more of that bulky margin.
No, I don't have Acrobat Pro, but let's see if I can actually,
So GIMP will do this as well.
yeah, but let's see if GIMP's a little, let's see if Acrobat will do it. I just want to see how that would work out. Can I decide where I want to clip it if I'm printing it at 50?
Yeah, you have to go to page setup.
I think that this may not be the page setup you get in Pro.
No, that's the same one. That's the
Okay.
Mac, that's the system.
All right.
Yeah, so if you had made this chart in tabloid and then you wanted to print it on letter, then you'd tell it to print on letter, and that would force Acrobat to print on letter.
Right. Well, it is an 11 by 17 chart, and I want to print it
Okay.
on letter and clip it somehow.
Right,
Just,
so
just
do
to see
that.
how I would do that.
Yeah, so click OK there. And then on the custom scale button, put 51%. And it won't look right. It'll look like, but it'll print out correctly.
I wouldn't want, say, 200%, so it's blown up.
What I do is 51%, and
Yeah, maybe Pro may be a little different than the plain vanilla Acrobat Reader. What I'm seeing is it will, yeah, I see what's happening here.
yeah, here's this, of course, is not going to show up because I have a background.
How about you share?
Oh, okay, let me turn my damn background off. Preferences. Come on, Zoom. Give
Joe,
me-
if you could make her a co-host, she could share screen.
No,
Yeah,
I can't share a screen. This is a printout.
Oh, I see.
Backgrounds.
I thought you could show us how you do it in Acrobat.
Okay, so what I can do is show the actual chart. And you know what I can do is I can take the recipes I've made and put them in the chat.
Yeah, or maybe post them to the Buzz thread or something like that.
Yeah, but you can't really see this. It gets blinded by the light. But
No,
there's
we
not
can't
too
see it
much
at all.
loss to margin.
Okay, so there's some way to blow stuff up and maybe crop it. And you may or may not need a specialized version of Acrobat. And you can certainly use GIMP or Preview or Illustrator or a number of different tools to work with the PDF and crop it.
I suspect that that Acrobat non-pro would do this because it's just the print box.
Yeah.
I think that iframe view will also do this, which is another free thing for Windows.
Yeah, there's any number of things that will do it. And that technique of going to a larger piece of paper with a higher scale will ensure that you get more place names, more nav marker information, more of the things that may be omitted if you try to print at a bigger scale. Yes.
I'm going to ask you the question I asked you when I saw you live last time, hoping that there's an answer now. To me, one of the most useful things about the old RNC maps is I could load them into Google Earth, and then I could load my GPS tracks into Google Earth, and then I could see, did we actually do it right, or do we cut across the middle of the shipping channel where we didn't want to be?
Yeah.
And it was extremely useful and a learning tool, and I like tracking stuff like that. And with turning off the RNCs, they used to have a grid. You could pick which one you want. You could make it seamless, so you could sort of slide around. You could print charts really easily of any section you wanted. So now, is that all going to be gone? Have they thought about the integration with Google Earth, or am I just screwed?
I don't think you're screwed, but what they've done is they've turned off the old services that allowed Google Earth to present.
Hey, brother, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to mute everybody again.
Oh, well, it is very windy weekend. If you look at the map and the wind direction, and
If I can
also
figure out how.
Frank, you need to mute yourself.
windy, extremely windy.
So if you haven't looked at OpenCPN, it'll do the same thing. You can bring it in both raster and vector charts into OpenCPN.
Sure.
And then import your GPS track.
Yeah, if you're using an actual GIS program like QGIS
Yes,
or
always.
OpenCPN, you can do all these. You can
Thank
do
you.
all these things.
Back.
I'm sorry.
It's iPhone 3, which is Frank. That's interfering.
All right, I just
Yeah,
muted,
great.
I just
Great.
muted him.
Great.
Yeah. Yes, you can use more specialized programs that require more investment of time. As far as Google Earth, I don't know what the plan is, and it's probably partly up to Google. A lot of services that used to integrate with the raster charts used a set of servers that NOAA provided that have now been turned off. And for instance, Gaia GPS used to integrate with raster charts. They sort of had a very bumpy transition to use the new ones. CalTopo, same thing. Marine charts stopped working in CalTopo. So a lot of companies have not really been keeping up with this change, and Google may be one of them. It all depends who's on the Google Earth team at this point. You know, how many people. But it is possible. There are digital layers that support the new charts too. Other questions or thoughts?
This is Mark. Just want to make a comment that since you are making these in geo-referenced PDFs, you can actually import those into Avenza maps on your phone. So then you will have your nautical charts on your phone, and it'll show you where you are on your phone.
And are those offline when you import
Yes,
them
you
that
can
way?
offline. Yep.
That's good.
One nice thing also is you can print out like a big D or E size nautical chart. So you've got a huge portion of the bay, and it'll all be on your phone. You zoom in on it to where you're at, and you don't have to keep changing maps.
Right. Who here uses Navionics, by the way? I'm curious. Fair few people. Yeah, I've found that at the moment that seems to be one of the better choices for offline reliable map use on the phone. I think they've done quite a good job. They're pretty far ahead of NOAA in kind of integrating multiple sources of information into those maps, as well as weather and tides and whatnot. And they include all the same things that you find in these maps that we're looking at now. So if you're talking about doing something with electronics, I do really recommend Navionics right now. It's a pretty good program.
So is there a way of taking these charts from NOAA and installing them on your GPS receiver, a Garmin GPS receiver that has maps built in?
I don't know, and it probably depends on which model Garmin, but different Garmins of different generations have had different limitations on what they can import. I don't use Garmin devices anymore. I just use a phone. So I don't really know what the latest is on Garmin. Does anybody else? Can Garmin import a georeferenced PDF? If not, you'd need to convert that PDF to some other format before Garmin could use it.
Garmin's very interested in selling their own base maps and things like that.
Yeah.
Their tools tend to be absolute crap for importing anything.
Yeah, that was my experience when I had one.
So there's a tool chain, which is multi-step that I've found, but it's not easy, and I was hoping that maybe there was an easier way.
Yeah, in this world, easy ways. There's a shortage of easy ways to do things.
And Joe, I'm curious, and maybe this is again not as relevant to kayaking use of charts, but have you heard anything about them adding any features to be able to surface at different zoom levels, danger zones and obstacles and things along those lines? So one of the benefits of a paper chart is you're not reliant on, oh, did I zoom in far enough to see the thing that I might strike?
Exactly.
And so that is definitely something we lose with paper charts. Have you heard of any plans to be, have a checkbox that says, anything that's a rock that, could surface or something, like expose that at any zoom level or something like that?
No, and I think what you're saying points up this sort of uncomfortable transition that we're in, because we're changing to a map world that assumes interactivity. And then when we're in our boats and have a piece of paper on our deck, we're breaking all those assumptions. So what I see happening is that more and more of these systems are just assuming that the mariner has a device that they can, play with the scale and drill down and tap objects and call up details. And they're not designed to commit to a specific printed representation, which is what we need. And it used to be that the old raster charts did that because that was their mode of existence. They were pieces of paper. And we're losing the demand that cartographers think about what do they want to commit to put on that piece of paper. As a result, we have these systems that sometimes put things in and sometimes don't. And I don't know how we change. I don't know that NOAA's goals are a good fit for what we want at this point in time. Yes, Tom.
This isn't as relevant to sea kayakers, but Daryl may have been referring to many stories of recreational sailors crossing oceans, and they're using their chart plotters and plotting courses. And at the scale they're looking at, they don't see a lot of mid-oceanic reefs, and they sometimes hit them because they simply didn't know they were there at the scale they were zoomed out at. So,
right, it's a big problem, and I think that on paper, at least, maybe not at 1 to a million scale, but at the scales that we normally work with, a hazard that's sufficiently important is going to be there usually in some form, even if it's just a dot. There'll be some legend next to it, or it'll be visible. And we seem to be moving away from that at the moment. That's sort of forcing the visibility of things that you really need to know about. Hopefully they'll get that back. I think we're sort of taking, 2 steps forward and 1 step back in this transition, and people aren't realizing yet what's been lost.
along those lines, and I guess I could probably figure this out by digging around on the website, but are you aware of like a formal feedback process where we can be making feature requests and things?
Yes, I am. And they've been pretty responsive when I've done it. Responsive, at least in the sense of writing back to me, not necessarily doing what I asked for. But I'm sure they're very busy. This last icon up here is feedback. And if you click this link, you get sent to this feedback form. I just fill this in, and put in my question. You can attach files. And I have found that they've always gotten back to me, within a few days. So they seem to be listening, but I think they're super strapped for resources.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this, all this chart, you said they are online, and you were saying, okay, people are using more and more electronics, booking. But don't you need a connection? I mean, like with Navionics, you can actually use it on airport mode.
Yeah, you do need a connection. It's just a website.
It's just a website. So how are Mariner being able to use it? So they have a satellite, so that's what I don't understand.
Oh, okay. Well, Mariners are in a different situation. They download special files, ENC charts, which are big data files, and they have dedicated devices in their ships that store the files locally. So, and they sync them when they have a connection, but when they're piloting their ships around, they don't need a connection. They have local copies of all this stuff, and they have a device that can display the ENC locally just from that saved file. So it's a very different way of consuming this information from what we're doing. They don't use a web browser.
So in the end, it sounds to me like, okay, I have an avionics on my phone, right?
Yeah.
So in the end, it sounds to me that if I want to print a file, NOAA is a good way to go. But then if I want to actually in real time get more information, I'll just use my Navionics.
Yeah, that's what I would do. And if you really want to sort of get as much control as you could possibly have, you could use a system like QGIS or OpenCPN and, play with the layers and fine tune things a lot. But that's a bigger investment of time than most people want.
You can always laminate the chart and then write on it with a Sharpie.
Yeah, you can do that too. All right. Maybe this would be a good moment. Just Tom, do you want to say anything about chart on every deck and what we're doing with that? It's kind of relevant to this if you're in the Bay Area.
Yeah, so for those in Basque and who paddle locally, we are going to be providing PDFs of charts that can be printed on 11 by 17 and laminated. And we're actually going to be handing out laminated copies to individuals. And we're going to provide these charts for popular areas that we paddle in the Bay Area and some of the surrounding coastal regions. And what Joe and the others found when they started working on this project was that we could get a better result by starting with by using the raster charts that are still available. So this is sort of our last chance to take advantage of this technology. So we're going to have nicer looking charts than you would be able to produce with the NOAA custom chart builder. So I think these are going to be really great for our local charts. But if I want to go to Southeast Alaska, then I'm probably, and if the raster charts are no longer available, then I think I'm going to be using the NOAA chart builder and trying to make my own charts, and they won't be as nice, but I think they'll still be usable. And hopefully, perhaps in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, as this transition continues, we're going to have much nicer looking charts that we can build, that they're going to work a lot of these bugs out, and maybe it will get better over time. And if we want to update our chart on a deck, our local charts, that's going to be difficult to do with the raster charts in the future. we might at some point need to switch to the ENC as the basis.
Yeah, and we would just regenerate all the same charts with that layer instead of the paper, instead of the raster layer when it comes to that time.
Right.
Fortunately, we're just squeaking by and getting the very last edition.
I didn't realize how, I thought we still had several years, but
I did too.
We're pointing out that the time has really run out.
I think one, I can't remember which one in the Bay Area. I tried to download it last Sunday and it was already not available.
Wow.
Yeah, so I can't remember which one it was, but there was one that was available only, the raster was not available, it was only the ENC.
Well, we got them
Yeah.
just in time, I guess.
Tom, is the chart on every deck going to include any Mendocino chart?
It's been mentioned. I'm not sure I don't think that those charts have been done yet, but that's the intention.
They can be, yeah. I grabbed them just in case because they're being retired too. So, yeah, Mendocino, I think we have little islands for Mendocino and Monterey. And I mean, well, that's a thing that's really under discussion at the moment, but I guess this calls out the urgency of maybe deciding where else you want to get charts for.
Is the size of the deck charts already fixed, or is that something to be discussed?
We've experimented and we feel like that the 11 by 17 is a good size. Margot's boat is a little bit narrow for that, but hers seems to be one of the few.
You can print them smaller. You know, that's just the size they're designed for.
So if anybody has the URL of the historical data site that has all of the charts before they retired, that would be really interesting to put in the chat.
Yeah, it's well, it's not historical yet. I mean, you can get to them. So I'll just drop this link into the chat if I can find the chat. No, that was not the chat. Here we go. That's the link to the interactive chart catalog for RNCs at the moment. And it shows which ones are about to be retired. Finding the historic ones is much harder. And I don't have a reliable way to get to them, although they've promised they're keeping them.
And that was the question.
Yeah, there is a historic archive site. It's pretty hard to use.
Joe, the last thing, the website, I just wrote it down because I was just reading it, but did you post it anywhere where to print the chart, the new charts?
It's in the slideshow, but I'm gonna just give you the link right now in the chat. So let's do that.
Joe, does retired mean they're not going to update them, or they're not going to let you download them anymore?
It means they're not going to update them. They're going to let you download them for a while. And at some point they'll be moved to some archival server. And of course, what they're worried about is, you know, they want to really cut back access for out-of-date charts because they can be liable. So NOAA is very strict about not. It goes along with the fact that they require people to have update charts, and they kind of want to not be distributing out-of-date charts. So for that reason, I feel like grabbing what I can while I can. But yeah, there will come a point where however much worse the ENCs are, they'll be more accurate. So
hopefully by the time they cut off access to the RNCs, they'll hire some user interface people and not let the software people design the product. So it'll actually be usable.
Yeah, I mean, they're dealing with a lot of legacy problems. I have had quite a few interactions with them, and I think they are cartographers. They're not just engineers trying to spit out, you know, whatever is the least effort. But they're wrangling with a really huge problem. The data itself is not in very good shape. Like there are things that are in the data sets for these ENCs that are not really distinguished from each other. So like text describing a light and a depth or a place name, I don't think they know the difference between those in the data. You have
And
a
I'd
lot of
have
work to
say
do.
The charts I've made using the custom chart tool, they're not Earth's best charts, but they're fine.
They will
I
get
use-
you there. Yeah.
Joe, you mentioned before the recording began that there was some discussion about Canadian charts. Do you think that Canada and other countries might in the future follow the example of the Coast Guard and making these available? Because it's been very frustrating having to buy paper charts and photocopy them.
Yeah, they are absolutely doing that. And I know that Canada is engaged in sort of making a schedule for doing the same thing. The Admiralty in the UK is doing the same thing. They're much further behind. And I think one of the problems is that whereas Office of Coast Survey was founded long ago, the government made the decision not to charge people for the information, but just for the paper. It's unusual. Like this is the United States to sort of expect the government to make you pay for everything. But in fact, these charts are free, and in other countries, the actual cartography operations are funded out of all the fees that they collect. So it's kind of a budgetary problem or a financing problem as much as anything. I don't know how they're going to fund the digital stuff once it's just information. Like, how will they gatekeep? So Canada now charges for digital charts, and they charge just as much as they did for the paper charts, and they were super expensive, even the digital versions. Whereas NOAA gives it away. Kind of wish everybody would do that.
Do they charge Canadians as well in Canada?
Yeah,
Wow.
they do. Yeah, they don't know who we are. They just want the money. All right, I think if there's no further questions, I might wrap it up and go to sleep. But it's been a pleasure hanging out with all of you and talking about this stuff and sharing it. It's a really interesting time for me, what's happening now.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you all. And I will, what's the best way to post the link to this? Just on Buzz? Follow up on Buzz?
Jonathan will if you give the link to Jonathan, he will, I hope is it going to be actually on our YouTube channel, or will this be on your YouTube or other service?
I don't really know how to get it onto Basque's channel, and I don't remember where we wound up with this, Jonathan.
If you provide the file to Jonathan, he can post it for you on our YouTube channel.
Jonathan,
you're muted,
muted.
You're muted, Jonathan.
If it's under 2 gigabytes, use WeTransfer. If it's over 2 gigabytes, I'll give you a server that you can use.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll just see how big the media file is, and we'll connect on that.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all again. This has been great. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Joe. Have a
Bye.
good night.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.